Artificial intelligence is no longer moving at the speed of governments. It is moving faster than the systems built to control it. That is the sentence you need to sit with for a second, because once you understand it, everything else about the last few years starts to make sense. Here's the twist most people get wrong. Washington is not asleep. Washington is not ignoring artificial intelligence. The real problem is something much harder to fix than political will. It is physics. It is bureaucracy. It is the simple fact that a piece of software can be rewritten in a weekend, but a power grid cannot be rebuilt in a weekend. A data center cannot be poured in a weekend, and a law cannot be passed in a weekend either. That gap between how fast code moves and how slow concrete, copper, and Congress move is the entire story tonight. Let's start with the timeline, because the speed here is almost unbelievable if you say it out loud. The public conversation about modern artificial intelligence really exploded when ChatGPT launched at the end of 2022. Barely 5 months later, in March of 2023, a far more powerful successor arrived, capable of reasoning through complex problems in ways the previous version simply could not. Then, in August of 2025, an even bigger leap landed, one built for serious coding work, long-form writing, and deeper reasoning, even though some reviewers said this particular jump felt smaller than the one before it. And by July of 2026, reporting emerged that the next version was already being prepared, delayed in part because of national security concerns inside the United States government. Read that last part again. The government was not silent. The government was already watching closely enough to slow a product launch. That is not a story of absence. That is a story of a government scrambling to keep pace with the technology sprinting ahead of it. And this is not a one-company story anymore either. What started as a race led by a single lab has turned into a genuine multi-front war, with several major AI systems from different companies shipping new, more capable versions in rapid succession across the last 2 years. The competition itself has become part of the acceleration. Nobody wants to be the company that pauses to wait for permission. Now let's talk about the money, because this is where the scale of this whole thing becomes almost cinematic. The major technology companies in the United States are projected to spend somewhere around $600 billion this year alone on artificial intelligence infrastructure. Let that number breathe for a second. $600 billion in a single year from a handful of companies. One of those companies alone, a search and cloud computing giant, is planning to spend up to $185 billion in 2026 by itself. That is not a marketing budget. That is closer to the gross domestic product of an entire mid-sized country, spent by one company in 1 year just to build artificial intelligence infrastructure. And then there is the funding round that made even seasoned finance reporters pause. One of the leading AI labs closed a funding round of $110 billion, valuing the company at $840 billion. Interested parties in that deal reportedly included some of the biggest names in retail, chip manufacturing, and telecommunications investment in the world. When companies that build online stores, computer chips, and cell phone networks all want a piece of the same artificial intelligence company, you know the entire economy is reorganizing itself around this technology. Here is the part that should genuinely worry you though, and it has nothing to do with chatbots writing essays. It is the fact that a lot of this investment is now circular. Companies are financing each other's expansion. One firm invests in another, which then buys cloud capacity from the first, which then reinvests in more chips, which are bought from a partner who also happens to be an investor. Reporting on this circular deal structure has raised real concerns, because when everybody is financing everybody else's growth, the entire system becomes more fragile than it looks from the outside. If one link in that chain wobbles, it does not stay contained. It ripples. So companies are moving at circular $600 billion speed. What is Washington actually doing about it? This is where the nuance matters, because the popular narrative online is that the government has done nothing, that regulators are asleep at the wheel, and that is simply not accurate. It is incomplete. On the 20th of January in 2025, the White House rescinded the previous administration's executive order on artificial intelligence. A few months later, in July of that same year, a new AI action plan was released, and this plan was not small. It contained more than 90 separate federal policy actions. The stated goal was to accelerate deployment, expand infrastructure, and push American artificial intelligence technology into global markets, while also cracking down on state-level rules seen as too restrictive. Whatever you think of the politics behind that decision, the action itself proves the government is not frozen, it is actively steering. But here is where the mismatch becomes visible. Congress moves through committees, hearings, votes, and negotiations. Regulatory agencies move through public comment periods, legal reviews, and interagency coordination. Independent policy analysis has consistently pointed to a fragmented approach in the United States, meaning there is no single, unified artificial intelligence law. Instead, there is a patchwork, built agency by agency, state by state, with narrow legislation addressing narrow slices of the problem. That does not mean the response is non-existent. It means the response is still being assembled, piece by piece, while the technology underneath it keeps changing shape. Think about it like trying to build a fence around a river that keeps changing its course. You can build the fence, you can even build it well, but if the river moves faster than your construction crew, the fence is always a little bit behind where the water actually is. And this brings us to the part of the story most people never even think about when they picture artificial intelligence. They picture chatbots, they picture code, they picture screens. What they do not picture is steel, copper, and concrete. But that is exactly where this race is actually being decided right now. Every large artificial intelligence system needs a data center to run in. Every data center needs an enormous, continuous supply of electricity, and every one of those electrical connections needs transformers, the heavy industrial equipment that steps voltage up and down as power moves through the grid. Reporting from across the American power sector describes utility companies scrambling to secure enough transformers and grid equipment because demand from AI data centers has pushed lead times to levels far beyond anything considered normal in this industry. In some cases, equipment that used to take months to receive is now taking years. Here is the human scale version of that problem. Imagine trying to open a restaurant, but the company that makes industrial stoves tells you the wait time for your equipment is now 3 years instead of 3 months because every other restaurant in the country decided to open at exactly the same time. That is what is happening to the American electrical grid right now, except instead of one industry demanding stoves, it is every major technology company in the country demanding transformers all at once, all urgently, all willing to pay a premium to jump the line. The electricity numbers back this up in a way that is honestly staggering. United States electricity consumption hit a record high in 2025, and it is expected to set new records again in both 2026 and 2027. The primary driver behind that surge is data centers and the artificial intelligence workloads running inside them. Total American data center capacity is projected to climb from roughly 24 gigawatts today to about 110 gigawatts by the year 2030. That is nearly a 5-fold increase in less than 5 years. Try picturing 24 gigawatts for a second. That is roughly enough electricity to power around 20 million American homes at once. Now imagine multiplying that by almost 5 in under 5 years, and you start to understand why power companies are panicking about transformers instead of software. This is the part of the documentary where the thesis really locks into place. A law can be written in a few months if lawmakers move quickly. A regulation can, in theory, be updated within a single budget cycle, but a power plant cannot be built in a few months. A high-voltage transformer cannot be manufactured in a few months. A new data center campus, with all its permitting, environmental review, and physical construction, does not happen in a few months either. Software moves on an engineering timeline measured in weeks. Infrastructure moves on a construction timeline measured in years. Washington is not just racing against Silicon Valley anymore. Washington is racing against the laws of physics and the limits of industrial manufacturing capacity. Now widen the lens even further, because this is not just an American story. It is a global one, and the differences between regions are genuinely revealing. The United States still leads much of frontier artificial intelligence development, largely because of the sheer scale of private capital pouring into research and infrastructure. China, meanwhile, is highly competitive on the model development side and is scaling industrial deployment aggressively, treating artificial intelligence as a core piece of national industrial strategy rather than just a consumer product category. Europe presents a fascinating contrast to both. European regulators tend to move faster than American regulators when it comes to writing rules and restrictions. But that regulatory speed has not translated into infrastructure speed. Reporting on the European situation points directly to insufficient data center infrastructure and ongoing energy constraints, meaning Europe risks falling behind both the United States and China specifically in the physical build-out of artificial intelligence capacity, even while its rulebooks are often more developed. So you end up with 3 very different national personalities in this race. America builds fast and regulates slowly. China builds fast and treats the whole effort as centrally coordinated industrial policy. Europe regulates fast but builds slowly. None of these approaches is purely right or purely wrong. Each one reflects a different bet about what matters most: speed of deployment, speed of oversight, or speed of physical construction. Here is a question worth sitting with, and honestly, I want you to leave a comment about this one. If the biggest bottleneck in the entire artificial intelligence race is no longer clever code, but literal transformers, power lines, and construction permits, does that change how you think about which country actually wins this race? Is the winner the country with the smartest model, or is the winner the country that can physically plug the most electricity into the most data centers the fastest? Because right now, the evidence increasingly points toward the second answer. Let's bring this back down to something a little more grounded, because all of this, the funding rounds, the transformers, the executive orders, eventually lands somewhere very familiar. It lands in your garage. The same industrial capacity being built for artificial intelligence data centers, the same chip manufacturing scale, the same electrical grid expansion is the exact same infrastructure that will eventually power autonomous driving systems, robotic manufacturing lines, and the next generation of connected vehicles. The transformers being fought over right now do not just power chatbots. They power the factories that will build your next car. The electricity being rationed between data centers and homes right now is the same electricity that will eventually charge millions of electric vehicles on the same grid. This is not a separate story from the automotive world. It is the same story, just one chapter earlier. So where does this leave us? Washington is adapting. That much is genuinely true. Executive orders have been rewritten, a 90-plus point national strategy has been released, national security reviews are already slowing down individual product launches from major labs. Standards bodies are updating their frameworks. This is not a government doing nothing. This is a government moving about as fast as government structurally can move. But artificial intelligence is no longer evolving on a political timeline. It is evolving on an engineering timeline. New models ship every few months. New capabilities appear practically every quarter. Meanwhile, meaningful legislation takes years to negotiate. Infrastructure projects take years to permit and build. And international coordination between allies and rivals takes even longer than that. That mismatch, months against years, is not a temporary glitch. It may be one of the defining structural challenges of the next decade. The real lesson here is not that artificial intelligence is dangerous or that governments are incompetent. The real lesson is that the biggest challenge ahead is no longer just building smarter artificial intelligence. It is building governments, institutions, and physical infrastructure capable of moving at a pace that can actually keep up with it. Software people can rewrite in a weekend. Grids, laws, and institutions cannot be rewritten that fast, no matter how urgent the need becomes. And that is exactly why this matters to you, sitting in your driveway thinking about what your next vehicle is going to look like 5 years from now. The pace of this race, the transformers, the gigawatts, the funding rounds, is quietly deciding what shows up in showrooms, what your electricity bill looks like, and how quickly autonomous technology actually reaches your street. To make sure you are never caught off guard by what is coming next in this industry, join us here. This story is only getting started.